Today, the UN General Assembly will begin its work at 4 p.m. Kyiv time. What is known about the meeting between Zelensky and Trump, and what else to expect from the first day of the General Assembly, TSN's own correspondent in the USA, Olga Koshelenko, reports from New York.
The 80th anniversary session of the United Nations General Assembly begins its work today. Leaders of dozens of countries have already arrived in New York. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, arrived the day before.
We are eagerly waiting for you to welcome to our place.
At the opening of the General Assembly, as is tradition, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, will be one of the first to speak. His spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt, has promised an important speech, but given the current administration's skeptical attitude toward international organizations, including the UN, everyone is waiting to see what messages will be delivered in this address. And immediately after his speech at the General Assembly podium, Trump will meet with the President of Ukraine. At the beginning, only statements from both presidents are planned. However, traditionally, the President of the United States may allow journalists to ask questions. It's been just over a month since the previous meeting between Trump and Zelensky, and the topics for discussion remain the same. The President of the United States is only threatening to impose sanctions against Russia. But now, if Europe takes its own measures against buyers of Russian oil, there is also the meeting between Zelensky and Putin promised by Trump, which has not taken place, as the President of the United States says, due to the animosity between the parties. And most importantly, security guarantees. The EU and Ukraine have developed their own draft, and after the US President's visit to one of the key European allies, the United Kingdom, there is now an opportunity to discuss this with the Ukrainian leader. Also, on Tuesday, a special meeting of the UN Security Council dedicated to Ukraine is expected. First Lady Olena Zelenska will have her own meetings on the sidelines of the summit. A meeting of the coalition for the return of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia will take place. More than 40 countries will participate in it. The leaders of Ukraine and Canada, together with the first ladies of both countries, will preside over the meeting. Since this issue is of particular interest to the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump, as is known, together with her husband, handed a letter about it to Putin. It is expected that on the sidelines of the General Assembly, Melania Trump will meet with Olena Zelenska. From New York, United States, Olga Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN 1+1.
Will the meetings at the UN General Assembly push Trump to take decisive action against the aggressor country? Will Europe be decisive? Write your thoughts on this in the comments below this issue. In the meantime, I will continue. The largest airport in Northern Europe, Copenhagen's Kastrup Airport, was forced to suspend all flights for several hours on Monday evening due to unidentified drones in the vicinity of the airfield. An unidentified drone was also spotted over Gardermoen Airport in the Norwegian capital, Oslo. Because of this, the airspace also had to be closed. Earlier on Monday, Norwegian police detained 2 people in connection with drone flights in the city center. Whether the 2 incidents are connected is still unknown. Law enforcement agencies in Denmark and Norway have promised to cooperate on this matter to clarify the situation. Last weekend, 3 major European airports in Brussels, Berlin, and London Heathrow suffered a powerful cyber attack. As a result, there were long lines at check-in, and dozens of flights were delayed or even cancelled. Explosions rang out one after another, and the debris from downed drones rained down right onto the streets of Moscow. The night before, drones attacked the territory of the Russian Federation. In addition to the capital, UAVs also visited a number of other Russian regions, resulting in a series of explosions and the closure of many airports. In particular, aircraft were spotted in Ryazan, Saratov, Engels, and Kazan. Because of this, air defense systems were actively operating in these regions, and the carpet plan was announced. The Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Samara airports temporarily suspended operations. Local authorities reported the alleged downing of nearly 30 drones in Moscow and its surroundings. Meanwhile, a video is circulating on propaganda channels showing the moment a drone crashed in Ruetovo, near Moscow. As a result of the loud explosion, cars were damaged there. The presidents of Ukraine and the United States, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, will meet today at 8 p.m. Kyiv time on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Zelensky arrived in New York the day before and has already held a number of meetings, including with the president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. They discussed the efforts of Ukraine's partners to end the war, as well as trade and economic cooperation, and the participation of Kazakh companies in the reconstruction of Ukraine. The president of Ukraine thanked his counterpart for supporting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our country. At the meeting with the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, they discussed the use of frozen Russian assets for the benefit of Ukraine and a new cooperation program with the IMF. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy informed Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew about the protection of religious freedoms and invited him to visit Kyiv. And on the eve of the meeting with Trump, there was also a conversation with his special representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. The president of Ukraine told him about the situation at the front and the results of counteroffensive actions near Dobropilya and Pokrovsk. They discussed cooperation in the defense sector, in particular the production of drones and the procurement of American weapons, which Ukraine proposed to the United States.
He complains about the West, but is ready to offer Trump nuclear arms limitations. In his speech, the Russian dictator Putin spoke about the control of strategic weapons. The last treaty on the reduction of strategic offensive arms, which limits the number of both Russian and American nuclear warheads and missiles, is set to expire in February next year. Currently, negotiations on its extension have not begun, particularly against the backdrop of disagreements due to Russia's war in Ukraine. So Putin stated that Russia proposes to adhere to the limitations for another year, provided, of course, that the United States takes a similar reciprocal step. Overall, Moscow reserves the right to reconsider these limitations. He says the decision will be made according to the situation. Instead of Eurovision, there's now Intervision. Russia held the first replacement for the world-famous song contest. The Kremlin was so offended by being excluded from the competition that they decided to create their own alternative. Among the participants are only countries friendly to Russia, such as China, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Not a single representative from the West went there. Analysts say the contest was created as a tool of geopolitical propaganda and to present Russia as a defender of traditional family values. How did the contest go, and who performed there? What goals is the Kremlin pursuing with its Intervision? Watch more in the report by Oksana Tkachenko.
Import substitution in Russia has even reached the song contest Eurovision. This weekend, the Kremlin held a full copy of the famous European Song Contest for the first time. And they decided to revive the Soviet-era format called Intervision, with which they tried to break out of international isolation. For the competition, the Kremlin mainly gathered participants from countries that can hardly be called democratic. Many of them openly adhere to a dictatorial regime. The contestants were allowed to perform in the pop music genre with touches of folk motifs. 22 countries that have friendly relations with Russia participated, including nations from Asia, India, China, South Africa, as well as Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia. But in Moscow, they tried to bring representatives of Western countries to the contest as well. However, not a single contestant from the European Union showed up. The only representatives from Europe turned out to be the Serbs. There was also one singer from the United States.
The US administration will not be represented on the judging panel and will not send an official delegation, but there will be a performer.
However, just days before the start, the American performer Brandon Howard, citing personal circumstances, still refused to participate. Instead of him, the arrival of the Australian singer Vesey was announced. But she also did not come due to unforeseen circumstances which in Russia were explained as pressure from the Australian government. Notably, shortly after the announcement of her participation, any mention of her support for the LGBT community was removed from Wikipedia. After all, the main idea of the Russian Intervision is that only supporters of traditional family values participate in the contest.
I wouldn't compare Intervision to Eurovision at all, in the sense that Intervision is first and foremost a music festival. A festival that supports traditional values, cultural values, family values, and truly focuses on music.
The idea and even the name Intervision are not new. Such a contest already existed from 1965 to 1968. It was a cultural project aimed at demonstrating the solidarity of the Warsaw Pact countries. There was an attempt to revive it in 1977 in Poland. But already in the 1980s, against the backdrop of an economic crisis and the rise of the anti-communist movement, it was shut down. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, starting from 1994, Russia actively invested in its participation in Eurovision. They used it as a tool to spread their own narratives, just like the Olympic Games. They poured huge amounts of money into it, and victories or top placements in the contest were presented as a sign of their own greatness. On the second day of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia was disqualified from participation. For some time, Moscow still tried to convince the West that culture should remain outside of politics. But in the fourth year of the war, the Kremlin decided to create its own alternative. The corresponding decree was signed by Vladimir Putin. They planned to allocate almost $9 million for the implementation, and the main person in charge was appointed to be Sergei Kyiv. He is the first deputy chief of staff of the Russian presidential administration, and at the same time, he is the chief curator of all social networks, numerous cultural projects, and ideological narratives within the country. According to Russian media, he is said to have one of the closest contacts with the Kremlin's leader.
This is the first competition. Everyone who wanted to, everyone was there. Sergei said this, was given the opportunity. What could have held back those who didn't participate the first time? Well, honestly, for some, there were a few political restrictions. And honestly, we just know that there were quite a few performers who really wanted to come, but in general, their desire didn't quite align with the opinion of the leadership of the relevant departments.
Accompanied by Sergei Kirienko and the general director of the Russian state TV channel Channel 1, Konstantin Ernst, the Intervision Song Contest was presented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the aggressor country, Sergei Lavrov, who stated that the contest should become a platform for strengthening mutual understanding and cultural ties. Analysts have already given their assessment of it. This is a competition that will be used as a geopolitical tool, reminiscent of the Cold War era when Russia opposed the West.
We wanted the Russian people and the entire Russian nation to fully understand and clearly know. We firmly consider the numerous and multifaceted barriers that have been deliberately erected by the collective West to be profoundly harmful and detrimental, especially emphasizing the significant and active role played by the current Biden administration in establishing these divisive obstacles. And also, it is important to note,
with such a contest, Russia is trying to create an image of itself as a champion of spirituality and family values, in contrast to the tolerant West.
on these platforms, which are modeled after Russian initiatives, there is no discrimination, no imposition of new contemporary interpretations or your evenings like war, secret evenings, or whatever else. As we saw at the opening of the Olympics in Paris, and this in itself has a very positive effect on them. If that's the case, then we're only glad. If we help to reveal the greatest, most natural human feelings instilled by God and by parents.
The winner of this year's Intervision was a participant from Vietnam. The winner was awarded $350,000 and a crystal trophy. Notably, after the competition ended, Moscow announced an unprecedented number of Intervision viewers, up to 4 billion people. That's half the population of the Earth. Considering that the classic Eurovision is watched by about 160 million people each year, and the previous record for viewership was set by the 2022 FIFA World Cup with just 1.5 billion viewers. This figure seems, well, very far-fetched, just like all the successes that Russia is currently trying to claim for itself. Oksana Tkachenko, Andriy Vayatoshkin, TSN.